Fear. Fear is a common emotion that all people experience once in their lives. Some fears are rational, such as a person threatening to shoot you if you don't give them money, and some fears not so rational, such as chromophobia, which is a fear of colors. Yes, that is a real fear and not something I made up. Now, one thing I believe most would fear is seeing their own funeral. Actually, let me be more specific. Seeing your own funeral, but you're not dead. You're in the casket, and you're about to be buried alive. So, with that out the way, hello and welcome to Unexplained Possibilities 8 True Buried Alive Stories. I'm Melvin, and let's jump right into it. The year is 1822, and in the country of Germany, a 40-year-old shoemaker was reported dead by his family. While reports indicate that the shoemaker was indeed dead, he didn't show signs of being deceased aside from being motionless. He wasn't stiff or decaying. Despite this, they went ahead with the funeral ceremony and burial. Interestingly enough, when the last shovel of dirt was thrown on the grave, a knocking was heard. The knocking was coming from below the ground. The gravediggers quickly dug up the coffin and found the shoemaker motionless but with his arms stretched upwards. A doctor was called in and he checked for vital signs, which included cutting one of the shoemaker's veins from which blood came rushing out. In an odd twist of fate, the shoemaker was neither dead nor alive. For 3 days, attempts were made to revive the shoemaker, after which he was finally laid to rest. In 1987, an Illinois publishing and media heir, Stefan Small, was kidnapped and buried alive in a wooden box near the town of Kankakee. A 30-year-old man named Danny Edwards and his 26-year-old girlfriend, Nancy Risch, crafted a plan to abduct Stefan and keep him immobile underground while demanding a $1 million ransom from his family. The kidnappers were able to supply the wooden box in which Stefan was buried with a minimal amount of air, water, and light inside via tubes. However, being buried 3 feet under a sandy area caused the breathing tube to fail, and Stefan ended up suffocating. Police were only able to find Stefan by locating his Mercedes near the burial site. Danny Edwards and Nancy Risch were convicted of murder in the first degree and kidnapping. Questions have been raised, though, if the two kidnappers intended for Stefan to die. Phill Amel was a 24-year-old French woman who caught cholera in 1867. After a few days of being sick, she was given the last rites by a priest and pronounced dead. Phill Amel was placed in her coffin 1 hour later, and within 6 hours, she was buried. When the gravediggers finished burying Phill Amel, they were about to head home when they heard a knocking sound from the gravesite. Realizing Phill Amel was still alive, the gravediggers rushed to dig her up and called for a doctor. As the doctor examined Phill Amel, he could hear a faint heartbeat. He also noticed that the fresh wounds on her hands matched the kind of injuries expected from knocking on a coffin lid. Phill Amel's breath was so faint that it almost was non-existent, but the doctor was able to revive her. Phill Amel would soon pass away the next day. It's unknown if she died from cholera or the stress of being buried alive. John Snart published The Thesaurus of Horror in 1817, In the book, he tells a true story of premature burial involving a man named Mr. Cornish. Mr. Cornish was the mayor of Bath who died from a fever 80 years before John Snart had his work published. At the time, it was customary for the body of the deceased to be quickly buried, and Mr. Cornish was no exception to that. His body was buried quickly after he was pronounced dead. The gravedigger was halfway done with his work when he stopped to have a quick drink with some friends who were passing by. While the gravedigger was chatting, a noise was heard. It was the sound of moans coming from Mr. Cornish's half-buried grave. It dawned on the gravedigger that Mr. Cornish had been buried alive. The gravedigger, along with his friends, hurried to try and save Mr. Cornish before he ran out of oxygen in his casket. By the time they had removed the dirt and were able to open the coffin lid, it was too late. Mr. Cornish had suffocated in his own grave and left his knees and elbows bloodied and beaten. This incident scarred Mr. Cornish's half-sister so much that she told her relatives to behead her when she was thought to be dead so that she wouldn't suffer the same fate. In August 2014, a 6-year-old girl in Uttar Pradesh, India, was buried alive, but she lived to see another day. According to the girl's uncle, Alok Aswasti, a married couple that lived close to the little girl, told her that the girl's mother wanted them to accompany her to a fair a few villages over. It wasn't until they reached a sugarcane field that the couple strangled the girl and buried her for reasons still unknown. Fortunately, villagers working in the field saw the trio enter and became suspicious when the couple left without the girl. The villagers went to the area where the girl and the couple were at. The villagers found the girl unconscious and not breathing in a shallow grave just inside the field. They were able to rush her to the hospital and care was taken to revive the girl. When the girl regained consciousness, she was able to identify her kidnappers. But the girl did not remember being buried alive, which might be a blessing. Police do not know why the neighbors planned to kill the girl, and the couple who did this are still at large. In 1915, in South Carolina, Essie Dunbar suffered an epileptic fit which to those around her thought it had claimed her life. Essie's lifeless body was scheduled for burial the day after in hopes that her sister, who lived outside of town, would have time to arrive for the funeral. Essie's sister failed to get to the cemetery in time, and Essie was buried without her present. Broken by grief, Essie's sister demanded the grave to be opened so she could see Essie one last time. When they opened the grave digger, the sister, and other onlookers were shocked. Essie Dunbar was alive and even smiling. After this, Essie would live on for another 47 years before truly passing away. In the late 1800s, the city of Pikeville, Kentucky, people were hit by an unknown disease. One such person was Octavia Smith Hatcher. After her son Jacob passed away in January 1891, Octavia went into a bedridden depression where she gradually became ill and slipped into a coma. On May 2nd that year, she was pronounced dead of unknown causes while still in her bed. As with most who died in the 1800s, Octavia was buried very quickly in the local cemetery. A week after her burial, many of the townsfolk had symptoms of the same illness Octavia had and fallen into a comatose state. However, after some time had passed, the townspeople began to wake up. Octavia's husband began to fear the worst and worried that he had prematurely buried his wife while she was still breathing. He began the process of digging up her grave only to find that his fears were in fact true. The lining on the inside of the coffin had been scratched and torn to pieces. Octavia's nails were bloodied and broken, and her face was contorted with horrific fear. She had died in the ground after being buried alive. Octavia was reburied, and her husband erected a monument over her gravesite. The monument still stands today. It's been speculated that the mysterious illness was caused by an African fly that can spread a disease known as sleeping sickness. In 1993, a 24-year-old South African man named Sipho William Letji and his fiancée were involved in a severe car accident. Sipho's fiancée survived, but Sipho was so badly injured that he was declared dead by first responders at the scene. Sipho's body was taken to Johannesburg mortuary and placed in a metal box for burial. But Sipho was never actually dead. He was just unconscious from the crash. For 2 days and nights, Sipho remained in the box until he awoke in a confused daze and began screaming for help. Luckily, some of the workers at the morgue were around to let him out of the box. However, when Sipho tried to return home to his fiancée, she sent him away because she thought he was a zombie. And that concludes Unexplained Possibilities, 8 True Buried Alive Stories. I hope you all enjoyed, and be sure to let us know what you thought in the comment section. And if you have any buried alive stories or bizarre stories in general, feel free to share them with us. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to follow Unexplained Possibilities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, and Instagram. Finally, during the month of February, we're having a $7 special tarot card reading. This is a limited time offer, so if interested, email unexplainedpossibilities@gmail.com. Thank you all for watching, and we will be seeing you next time.